5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
You're listening to the GHT Overland Podcast.
Welcome back. Thank you for joining us on the GHT Overland Podcast. This is where you get the greatest interviews and insights from overland travelers around the globe. Learning from their stories and experiences, you will learn the basics to the advanced in overlanding, so buckle up and get ready for more adventure. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lisa. This is part 2 with Eric and Brittany of the Jeepsies.
This week, we jump right back into the interview, discussing finances, budgeting, some really great tips on staying connected on the cell network when you're in Mexico, and a lot more.
I wasn't in on this one, but I'm super excited to hear the rest of the interview.
All right, let's jump back into the interview with Eric and Brittany. So let's dive deeper on finances. One of the most common questions asked is, how can we afford to do what you're doing? Or the question you probably get sometimes is, you must be rich or you must have won the lottery. Sure. Obviously, the real question is, how can they afford to do what you're doing? How can they plan for that? So for our listeners, do you have any tips or ideas on smart planning so that they can do something more than a weekend or a week's vacation trip? And if you can go into maybe budgeting that you do, either daily, weekly, monthly, that would be super helpful.
Sure. So definitely a lot here to unpack. We could do a whole episode just about this. But the short answer to how we can afford it is that Eric is retired military. He served 20 years, and so he receives retirement every month. And that's definitely something that allows us to take some risks because we know that we have that coming in each month. And then on top of that, a couple years before we started RVing, so back in 2011, we started an online marketing company. And at the time, it was wonderful because it did give us location independence. All that we need to do our work is a solid internet connection, which even down in Mexico, we were surprised by how much connectivity we have. Not to go too far off topic, but both AT&T and Verizon works in Mexico. AT&T actually purchased the largest network in Mexico, per my understanding. You can go on Verizon's website, see their coverage map, and I believe that AT&T's is even larger than that, even though they don't publish it. And so, like I mentioned before, we were able to work in Mexico Monday through Friday, and we could live in Mexico forever, provided we got the right visas and permissions to stay there. But from a work and income standpoint, it totally worked.
And that's how we were able to do it.
Right.
But there are some suggestions we have for people who don't have an internet business or don't own their own company.
Right. Well, and coming from the RV community, which again in the United States is, it's an older, more mature community. There's more resources that are out there because people have been RVing in the US longer than they have been overlanding. So we highly suggest a podcast called The RV Entrepreneur. And don't be thrown off by the fact that it has RV in the name, because it's all about vehicle-based travel and doing it full time. And there's also a Facebook group called the RV Entrepreneur. And I think that anyone who is really curious about finding the right way for them to earn income and travel full time, those are definitely resources. For anyone going to Overland Expo West, we will actually be presenting a session called Overlanding and Working Full Time, Is It Even Possible?
Right.
And
Okay,
so
cool.
we'll be doing a session 2 times over the weekend on that topic. So we would love to meet any of your listeners who are going to be at Expo too.
And then we'll also be on a couple panels there.
Mm-hmm.
While we're there, we're going to be on the Mexico and Central America panel.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be on the Overlanding with Kids panel
Sure.
as well.
Yeah, but to get back to the question, we took so we were in Mexico for 7 weeks. We took the equivalent of $2,500 US, converted it to pesos, took that, and we came back with some. And so when the math is done out, we spent about $50 a day in cash in Mexico. And I say in cash because we did put a few things on our credit card as far as fuel and a few meals. But in pesos, in cash, we spent about $50 a day in Mexico.
And everything in Mexico, for those considering Mexico, everything in Mexico is cheaper. Everything in Mexico is cheaper except for fuel. Fuel is about twice as expensive as what it is here in the States.
Ooh,
so
ouch.
Yeah, it's painful, but you make up for it, Chris. We had some meals that here in the States, you would have been around the $200 price range. Not that we go to $200 meals, but had it been here in the States, it would have been that. We paid like $50 for that, and it was like a 6-course meal. So it's really, really cheap in Mexico to eat out, to have transportation, to buy goods and do all of those things. What's not cheap is fuel.
Sure. So like a half gallon of milk costs less than $1 US in Mexico. You can come out of the market with a bag brimming with fruit for less than $2. Obviously the equivalent in pesos. And so food is very affordable in Mexico. And we found that it could sometimes be cheaper to eat out in Mexico, say at a street vendor, than it was to go buy groceries and make a meal for yourself. And so that's something to keep in mind too, is where you're traveling to. Obviously, overlanding in Europe is going to cost differently than what it would in Mexico or Central America. And so again, it comes down to research and finding out what things cost in the countries that you want to go to.
But the bottom line is, and I think an answer to your question, Chris, is that anybody can do this. You don't have to have the rig that we have. You don't have to have all the modifications that we have. You don't even have to have the business that we have. What you have to have is a desire and a plan, and take your first trip. It doesn't have to be international. It could be to your local state park and just live out of your overlanding vehicle setup, whatever that is for you, and learn from your experience and learn what you need to add, what you need to take away, and then develop a plan and say, okay, this is something that interests me. This is something I want to do. So what is that next step? How am I going to then build an income that gives me some passive or residual income? And in order to do that, you have to do your homework. You have to go through the steps. And like Brittany said, we've built our business over 8 years, and we're still looking to transition that over the next 3 years. So we're still in that process ourselves. But it's an 11-year process for us. So anybody that thinks, listen, I just want you to give me the magic bullet so that I can go and do what you do, they're missing the point. This all took a lot of work, a lot of late hours, a lot of planning, a lot of research to get to the place where we are today. And so my encouragement is it is doable, but you've got to put in the work if this is something that you want to do, and develop a plan and take the steps that you're going to need to take to make your vision a reality.
I don't think anybody could have said that any better. That was perfect. Thank you, Eric. That was absolutely perfect. That is what you need to do. If you want to go do something full time and you've got a dream and a desire to go do it, it's going to take some work. There is no magic bullet. Now, any tips that you've got on working remotely? You mentioned, Brittany, you've got a really nice setup. Is there anything more that our listeners can learn if they're doing something that's kind of internet-based on the road? Any items that you use to be able to get either Wi-Fi or cell service to be able to get that connectivity? Any tips you've got there?
I've got some tips. We carry redundant systems. So for people who are already doing this, our recommendation would be to definitely carry redundant carriers. So we personally carry AT&T and Verizon everywhere we go, and we pay for these plans so that sometimes you're going to be in an area where Verizon has good coverage and AT&T doesn't, and vice versa, right? So by having these redundant systems, we pretty much have coverage everywhere we go with those two carriers. In addition, there are several apps out there that we use all the time. There's a great app by Chris and Cherie from Technomadia, and they have a group called Internet for RVers and Cruisers. Again, the RV world is very similar to the overlanding world in that we're both vehicle-dependent adventure travel. And so don't discard all of the resources that are out there in the RVing world if you're into overlanding, because these guys have already been doing this for so many years, as Brittany mentioned, in the United States, facing many of the very similar challenges that we have as overlanders. And so you should be encouraged to look up and see what RVers are doing in solutions to the questions that you have. So Chris and Cherie created this app called Coverage. It's called Coverage, and it has a question mark at the end. It's a great little app. I think it's like $3. We use it every single time we move. And basically, you can zoom in on any location and take a look at what coverage levels there are in that location where you want to camp, and you can overlay it by the different carriers. So you can click on the Sprint button or the AT&T or the T-Mobile or the Verizon button, and it'll show you the signal strength in the specific area that you're planning on going to, or if there's no signal there. And so there are a ton of apps that we could recommend, but that's one of them that we use all the time.
Okay, cool. So let's go into navigation and communication real quick. Tell us about your communications, any tips you've got from cell phone plans to SIM cards. How do you plan that, especially going into Mexico? How did you do that?
So we started with what we had already, and we were curious. We have AT&T phones. We have a Verizon hotspot. Are those going to give us anything in Mexico, or do we need to start from the ground up? And we were pleasantly surprised to find that the coverage is there in Mexico. And not only that, but for AT&T, it's literally something that you just have to turn on, and it doesn't cost you anything extra to use your AT&T service in Mexico. For Verizon, there is an extra charge based on a 24-hour period.
But it's nominal. It's like $5 a day.
Yeah, it's fairly nominal if you're using it to work full time. It's totally justifiable. If you're just browsing Facebook, I probably wouldn't use it. But if you need it for work, it's something really good to have. And I love that Verizon actually publishes their coverage map. And they do that worldwide. And so you can, if you're a Verizon customer, you can go on their website and see what the coverage is to give you, an expectation of, how far am I going to need to drive? Am I going to need to stay around this city or that city on my work days, and what does that look like? And just a little bit of research showed us that AT&T's network was going to be even larger than Verizon. So even though AT&T does not publish their coverage map, we had good expectations that were borne out. We were really surprised. I mean, we would be in the middle of nowhere.
There's like donkeys and cows on a side street in some little village in Mexico.
Yeah, we were really, just, in the middle of our drives, and we would have coverage, and in a comparable place in the United States, as far as, being completely off the beaten path, we would never expect to have coverage in the US. And yet there we were in Mexico with our AT&T phones, and we could access the internet, make phone calls. It was really one of the best surprises of going to Mexico as far as being people who work full time.
Yeah, if anyone's considering going to Mexico, while Verizon does show you the map and they charge you a daily fee, we didn't, at least I never used Verizon the whole time we were in Mexico. I used AT&T exclusively.
No, we never ended up using Verizon.
And I was very, very happy with it. So if you're considering, and maybe you can't afford to have two carriers, or you don't want to carry two carriers with you, if you're going to Mexico, take AT&T with you, at least now in this time.
Got it. And do you guys use like a UHF, VHF radio? Was that helpful when you went into Mexico?
We don't. We have so our communications in the Jeep is something that we're really working on this system. There's actually, I have my dream list and my shopping list. But right now our communication setup is the Garmin InReach Explorer which we've already talked about. That is probably the most vital piece of gear that we own for safety and security. We also have a CB radio, but when we put the rooftop tent on, we had to move our antenna, so it's actually not functional right now. And then other than that, we carry a pair of GMRS radios. Our hope moving into the future is to get into ham radios, which again, this is part of our planning process. And all of our friends in the overlanding community are telling me, Eric, you guys got to get on ham. You got to get on ham. So we're heading in that direction for ham radio. We also want to add our CB antenna back onto the Jeep, but we're going to have to find a spot to put it in where it's still going to get coverage and not interfere with our setup. So, kind of what I talked about earlier, it doesn't matter where you start, you're always going to be developing and modifying your overlanding setup to what suits your needs best. For us, our communications right now just is our 2 cell phones, our hotspots, our Garmin InReach Explorer, a non-functional CB, and a hope for a ham radio.
That's great. Cool. So let's go through some onboard necessities real quick. How much, and I know we covered this a little bit, but if there's any more detail to go into, let me know. How much fuel do you carry? How far does that take you? And any tips you've got on calculating your fuel needs?
Okay, so yes, we carry 22.5 gallons of fuel in the fuel tank of the Jeep Wrangler. It will take us about 300 miles, give or take, depending on what type of terrain you're on and whatnot. And then we also carry the external fuel tank, which I mentioned earlier, the Titan Fuel Tanks Trail Trekker 2, which carries an additional 12 gallons of fuel. So in effect, it gives me another half tank of fuel. So I carry a tank and a half of fuel. Notoriously, and I know you had talked about, Chris, that you and Lisa are thinking about doing the whole Jeep overlanding thing. Jeeps, I love it how a friend of mine said, are the vehicle that can take almost nothing anywhere. And so, the payload capacity on a Jeep Wrangler Unlimited is only 1,189 pounds. Yeah. And when you're overlanding, you're adding a whole lot of equipment and gear and fridge and rooftop tents and all this kind of stuff to it. And so you end up not having, lowering your fuel mileage, so to speak, and not having much space to carry things in. And so a lot of how far it can take you will depend on how much gear you're going to take, how much weight you're going to add, and you're going to figure that out as you go. So the biggest tip is to really, reset your trip odometer and do a couple runs wherever you're at when you're fully stocked. Okay. And most people don't think to do that, but you can do that before you go on your trip. So fully pack out your vehicle, put all your food, all your water, all your fuel, everything you're going to be carrying with you wherever you're going to go, and then make some runs. Go to an off-road park and run an off-road park with your setup. Go to a highway and figure out your highway miles, and that's going to help you figure out what it is that to calculate your fuel needs.
Okay, cool. And how much water do you guys carry, and any tips you've got on filtering water?
So the rule is 2 gallons per person per day. We typically carry about 6 gallons of water with us in the Jeep. We actually use Rotopacks to carry the water itself. We carry 4.5 gallons worth of water in the Rotopacks, and then we have like water bottles, water jugs that have screw-on lids that we also pack in the Jeep as well for a couple extra things of water. As far as filtering goes, we actually get the water filtered before we put it in there. There is a great device out there called the Guardian water filter by MSR.
Okay.
And it's going to give you cleaner water than most filters do in most residential homes.
Okay, cool. Now, do you guys use solar, or I don't know if you use a generator in Basecamp, but any tips you've got on using solar and or a generator?
Sure. So on Basecamp, we have 420 watts of solar. So our friends, the previous owners, maxed it out on solar. Yeah. And so we are loving that setup. We're sitting in the RV right now. The sun is shining and the batteries are charging. And that is a great feeling. It does have a generator, but we haven't used it yet. On Guardian, our Jeep, we don't have solar or a generator. We have been recommended to use those, they're like foldable solar panels.
Like a solar blanket.
Like a solar blanket that we theoretically could put on our rooftop tent. And so that's kind of on our radar, but we haven't pulled the trigger on that yet.
But what we've done for Guardian is that we've picked up the Genesis off-road dual battery system. And so we're actually running 2 Optima Yellow Top AGM batteries, deep cycle batteries, inside underneath the hood of the Jeep with the Genesis off-road system, which is a solenoid, which basically uses one battery as a cranking battery, the other as an accessory battery, and it will only drain your cranking battery down to the level where you can still start the vehicle, and then the solenoid will switch the accessory battery and it'll drain that one all the way down. And then when you turn over the Jeep, it'll charge the cranking battery first, and once that's fully charged, the solenoid flips again and it starts to charge the accessory battery. So we actually run our ARB fridge 24/7 in the Jeep with just that setup, and we've never had any issues with it.
And Lee from Altitude Industries, who installed our iCamper rooftop tent, he put in a device in the tent where we can see what our batteries are at, so we know when we need to take a drive.
Right. And he also added LED lighting in there, 12-volt battery, 12-volt outlets, as well as USB outlets, so we actually have power in the tent.
Right, and that allows us to do our work sitting in the tent.
Oh, smart. Okay. Yeah, the Genesis off-road has saved me more than once when I have misjudged electrical needs charging something else, and you're in the middle of nowhere, but the Jeep still starts.
Yes, we're big fans.
Okay, very good. So you talked about the ARB fridge. What size of fridge did you get, and any tips you've got on selecting a refrigerator?
Yeah, so we do have the ARB 50 quart. It's a fridge freezer. We absolutely love it. It's been fantastic for everything that we've needed to do with it. I do have an article about it on our blog, which if you're interested in going into great detail on that, you can take a look at it. But one of the things that I really like about it, it's actually designed for off-roading. And so it can work at 30-degree inclines and stay running on a compressor. It can also keep ice cream frozen if you put it in the freezer mode in 90-degree ambient temperature while drawing less power than a desktop computer. So it's incredibly efficient. It's a great unit. If you have a shelf, for example, in the back of your vehicle and you can't lift the lid of the fridge all the way up, you can actually take the lid off completely without having to move the refrigerator, and then you can reach in and grab your material that you have in there. It's got rounded corners. It's got steel grab handles. I mean, it's just a fantastic device. Having said that, we just came back from the RV Entrepreneur Summit in Alabama, and Dometic was there, and they've got some new offerings, and we're pretty excited about what Dometic is coming out with. We actually got to see some things there that they haven't released to the general public, so can't really talk about them, but I'm sure they're going to be at Overland Expo West, so it'll be interesting to see what ARB and Dometic are doing at Overland Expo West.
Okay, yeah, that will be super interesting to learn what they've got up their sleeves. Any specific recovery gear that you use or would recommend to our listeners to make sure that they've always got with them?
Yes, absolutely. So recovery is a part of overlanding, and it should be on the forefront of every overlander's mind. One of the general rules of off-roading, this doesn't only apply to overlanding, is never wheel alone. Because you're going to be out there by yourself, and you might get into a situation where you have to try and do a self-recovery. Having said that, everybody does it, and they end up someplace by themselves. And when you're by yourself, you need to make sure that you have as much recovery gear as you can possibly have that's going to help you get out of a situation. So as far as specifics, we definitely have a Warn winch on the front of the Jeep. It's the Warn Xeon 10S. It's a synthetic line. It's capable of pulling 10,000 pounds and 20,000 with a snatch block. We have 2 snatch blocks on board the Jeep as well in case one of them fails or we need to have a second for directional winching. We also have a high lift jack. We carry tow straps and tree savers and every type of air equipment that you could possibly have. We have an ARB dual air compressor for the tires and for running pneumatic tools if we need to do that. I've also got a tool bag from Adventure tool company. I love this tool roll that we have. We encountered them at Overland Expo East. And what I did, Chris, is I emptied out 3 huge tool bags that I used to carry, and I put them all in this one tool roll. And what I did is I took out every tool that didn't apply to my vehicle. So I used to have a setup where I could fix pretty much anybody's vehicle that we ran into. And I had to sacrifice that in order to be able to condense those 3 tool bags into one. But now I have one tool roll that has every tool that I need to fix my Jeep inside this tool, inside a small, footprint, if you will, that's carryable and expandable, and it has everything in there. And I mean everything in there that I need to fix the Jeep. So it's a fantastic piece of gear. So I can't stress enough about recovery equipment. One thing I will tell you is that 99% of the time that you're out on the trail and running trails and doing things, you probably won't use hardly any of your recovery gear if you're overlanding. But that one, and so you're not going to want to pack it. You're not going to want to pack it when you go to Mexico. You're not going to want to pack it when you take off on these crazy trails. But the one time you need it, you're going to wish you had it. And so recovery gear is like top of the list when you're packing out your overlanding rig.
Yeah, and the same advice that you gave earlier, make sure that you use it, make sure you're very comfortable and you know how everything works inside and out. It is not the time to try and figure out how it works when you're stuck and it's raining and it's really crappy weather. Right.
Oh, and Max Tracks. I'm sure you get that. People say that all the time, but we love our Max Tracks. We've used them many times. Interestingly, never for ourselves. We've always used them to help somebody else. But we have them on board, and they're fantastic. I can't say enough about them. We've even used them to pull out an RV. So really good stuff.
Cool. So road stories are always a favorite. What's a favorite road story of yours, or maybe a situation you were nervous about going into and how it turned out for you?
So when we went up into Sierra Gorda, we spent our first night in San Joaquin. And the next day we were coming out of town. We were on a barely 2-lane dirt road winding down a mountain. And we stopped on the side of the road. There were 5 vehicles total in our group from Overland bound. And we stopped to take pictures because it was a beautiful view of the mountain valley. Well, when we all got back into our vehicles to get going, someone was not paying attention and hit the person in front of them. And there ended up being a busted radiator in the mix. Oh. And so there we were, stuck on the side of this road.
On a mountain.
On a mountainside with 2 toddlers. So there was Caspian and there was a 3-year-old too.
Santiago.
And so a couple people hopped back into the vehicle and had to track back to San Joaquin on a weekend to try and find a mechanic and the spare part that they needed. The rest of us were on the side of this road, and we weren't on the side of the road. We were on the road because there was no side for 5.5 hours. And that was quite the experiment. Overall, it was a good experience because we're overlanders. And when we got hungry, we popped the bed of somebody's truck and we pulled out the stove and we had a meal. We had our chairs, we had toys for the kids. So it was a long wait, but our friends made it back. We did a trail hack and got the Jeep back up and running and went off to our next destination.
Yeah, and he ended up doing the whole trail with us. So, it's possible, but, you got to be flexible. It's kind of what we talked about earlier. Just be flexible and be patient.
And super great to be with a group of folks that know how to do such a road repair.
Yeah, well, everybody pitched in, and I'm not sure that any one person could have done the job themselves. But with everybody pitching in, we got it done. And man, it sure was fun to watch because I was not in there turning wrenches. I was the one taking pictures. But everybody had a smile on their face. Nobody was pointing fingers. Nobody was saying, why did this happen? Let's get out of here. Everybody had a good attitude and we got through it together.
Yeah, and we all agreed that there was no discussion. Like, we all agreed that we need to help this guy get his vehicle fixed and then we need to get back on the trail.
Together. Because, people had thrown around the option of some of us going on to camp. But at the end of the day, we all decided, no, we're staying together as a group.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the great things about both the overlanding community and the community with Overland Bound. You're going to run across, those are the people that are part of the community. They're always going to stop whatever they're doing to help you. And that team effort is always going to be there. And I think that's just, it's so amazing to be a part of that community.
Yeah.
So my other road story involves this same group, and it was really funny, Chris. So the same group that we're with, we finally get down to our very first campsite, right? And we're unpacking and everybody's setting up their tents and stuff like that. And I look over and these guys are like pulling cellophane wrappers off of their rooftop tents and their ladders. And I'm like, that's new stuff. You just got that? And they're like, oh, we've never been overlanding. So we found out at the campfire, they were off-roaders, but they had never like camped with their vehicles and gone overlanding. When they found out we were coming to Mexico, they followed us on Instagram. When they found out we were coming to Mexico, they got all excited. So they all went out and bought all this brand new gear that they had never used. And it was their very first time overlanding when we went down there with them. It was great.
It's really special.
Really special.
That's great. And how cool for them to just stop and get the stuff they need. Hey, let's go. It sounds cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great group of folks. If you ever are planning to go to Mexico,
The interior of Mexico,
make sure you get in touch with us. We'll put you in touch with them right away. They're great,
Awesome.
great people.
Cool. So any helping others, doing good philanthropy that you focus on while you're overlanding?
You know, we do a few things. I mean, we try and do our best to help others with what we can. One of the things that we did that we enjoyed doing was we went to our bank before we went and we got $200 worth of $2 bills. $2 might not seem like a lot, but to put this in perspective, the average daily wage in Mexico is just over $4. So if you give somebody a $2 bill, you're literally giving them half a day's pay. And so we went and got $202 bills, and we just had them with us, and we would give them to people as we felt led to do that. But more importantly, we ran into another group, a wonderful group of off-roaders called the Nahuales Off-Road 4x4 Off-Road Club in San Luis Potosí, and they do a lot of philanthropy work down there, and they invited us to go out with them. And we went with them, and we got blankets and toys and food and just goods, basically. And we went to this tiny, tiny little village called Purísima, and we parked on the basketball court on an old dilapidated basketball court that was in the middle of their village. And the people came out of the woodwork, kids and dogs and seniors and adults and everybody in between. Everybody just came out, and we were able to play games with them and hang out with them and give them toys and blankets and food and just sit down with them and hang out. And what I really found that was incredible was the heart and attitudes of these people. They weren't begging for anything. They were thankful to have it. But when all was said and done, they said, my home is your home. And they invited us into their homes to make us tamales and make us food. And these were people that didn't have much to give, but they were willing to share what they had. And so we were just as blessed, if not more, I'm sure, than they were by our visit. And it was just a beautiful thing. So, that's part of our hope, is to be able to, find people, help people, do good things, and just be part of the larger world community.
Oh, that's great. Cool. So this has been a lot of fun. Anything that we've missed?
I don't think so, Chris. I think we've covered.
Perfect.
We've covered.
So let's wrap it up with some fun facts about you. What keeps your co-driver occupied during long drives?
Books and a 2-year-old.
Oh, a 2-year-old to keep you busy.
Yeah, she's my co-driver, so she's the one that answers that question.
That's awesome. And do you guys play any musical instruments on the road or around the campfire at night?
Caspian does. He actually plays a harmonica. For whatever reason,
kidding.
He loves it. He picks it up and he blows into it. And,
That's awesome. Love it. And what's your favorite drink in the morning to get you going?
Definitely need to have some coffee on my Genesis stove.
There you go. And Eric?
I don't really. I drink water. I'm on keto, so I pretty much drink water all the time.
So with keto, is coffee okay, or you just don't like coffee without sugar?
You can drink coffee, and every now and then I'll do it, but it's very rare.
He's not a big coffee drinker.
I just prefer water.
Cool. And what's a favorite beverage at night to wind down after a long day on the road?
Definitely a glass of wine, and every once in a while I'll make Eric some peppermint tea.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. That sounds good. Cool. So what is your best advice to aspiring overlanders like us?
Just get out there.
Get out there and do it. And don't be afraid to take a chance and take a risk. Keep safety first, but don't dream about it. I will tell you a story that my dad told me when I was really young. He said, son, there are 3 frogs on a log, and 2 make a decision to jump off. How many frogs are on the log? And I answered 1. And he said, no, son. He said, think about what I just asked you. There are 3 frogs on a log, and 2 make a decision to jump off. How many frogs are on a log? And then it hit me. They made a decision, but they didn't take any action. So there were still 3 frogs left on the log. And then he told me, son, don't be a frog on a log. And that's my biggest encouragement to anyone who's considering doing this. You can make decisions all day long, and you should, but until you take an action, you're not doing anything. You're not moving forward towards your dreams. So my encouragement to you is get out there, like Brittany said, just get out there and do it. Get out there with what you got. If you've got a ground tent and a station wagon and you want to start overlanding, put the tent in the station wagon and get out there and do something about it. And then take notes. Learn what it is that you needed that you didn't have. What did you take that you didn't need, and start making lists and subtracting the things you didn't need and adding the things that you do need as you're able to do it. And then take your next trip and learn from that trip, and just keep putting one foot in front of the other and go explore this beautiful, beautiful world that we have. Go meet people, go encourage people, and be a part of the world community. Make sure you leave the trails better than you found them, and tread lightly everywhere you go.
I love it. Great. Life is about taking action. Nothing happens without you actually physically taking the action. It starts with a decision, but without the action, you've got nothing.
That's right.
So how can people learn more about you and what you're doing? If you can give us like your website, your blog that you do, social media, how can people get connected with you?
Absolutely. So our blog is Jeepsies.com. So it's a play on the word gypsies. And so in addition to our website /blog, Jeepsies.com, we're on all the socials. So find us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And we are very transparent. We love to empower other people. And so even if we're a stranger to you, please reach out to us and ask us questions. We won't be strangers for long.
And we do plan, like I said, we're speaking at Overland Expo West this year, May 17th through the 19th. If you haven't got your tickets yet, go get those tickets. Overland Expo West is an incredible event, one of the largest overlanding events in the world. And I'd highly encourage anybody who's even thinking about becoming an overlander to go. I can't give you the dates and times that we're speaking because they don't allow us to do that, but we will be there. We will be speaking. And if you run into me personally and you have the correct ticket to see our speech, then I will tell you where and when that is.
And who knows, maybe we'll do a Jeepsies meetup if we hear from enough people. So definitely reach out.
Yeah, that would be really cool. How much fun is that? Awesome. So any other information you'd like to give or useful resources that our listeners should check out?
Well, there are 2 forums out there for overlanding. One is Overland Bound, and the other one is Expedition Overland. I believe that's what it's called. I don't use the second one as much. I am signed up, but I found just a great community on Overland Bound. And, you know, some people, just like any other community, some people have issue with Overland Bound for one reason or another. One of their tenets is it doesn't matter what vehicle you drive, and some people don't like that statement. I actually agree with that statement. Like I said, I don't care what you drive, as long as you have a desire and a hope and a plan to move forward and do something extraordinary, then as far as I'm concerned, you're an overlander in my book. Get out there and do it. But Overland Bound is a great resource if you're just learning and you just want to look through what other people are talking about and doing. I would encourage you to go to overlandbound.com, get plugged in, get to know some of the folks there. It's what we did when we first started.
Yeah, we would agree with you 100%. That's great. So thank you guys so much for your time. We are absolutely humbled that you've given us such an amazing look into your world and experiences and knowledge. So safe travels and adventures to you, and we hope to catch up with you again in the future.
Well, thank you, Chris, and our best to you and Lisa. We really would like to connect with you guys in person someday.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Saw her in the woods, yeah. Thought he was cracking.
Caspian, harmonica, and a full RV tour? Dude, we're going to need to hook up or have mom and dad produce a YouTube video of you doing an RV harmonica tour.
That would be adorable.
I think it'd be great.
He would have my attention.
Just an idea, guys. So, if you have a boring Monday afternoon sometime.
And those $2 bills?
Yeah, when Eric was talking about that, I was thinking, how many banks stock $2 bills? But nonetheless, what a really great idea to be able to give back a little bit. Nothing crazy, but for the people that they were running into in Mexico, that is a big deal. And you can make a big impact with something from your perspective that really isn't that big.
Yeah, it makes a huge statement.
Yeah, little things make a big difference.
Mm-hmm. And I absolutely love the frog on the log.
The frog on the log story?
Yeah.
That was really good. So, and really good points. It starts with making a decision, but that decision doesn't do you any good without action. And that's the one thing that most people are missing, is to get up off the couch and make the action, make little steps one point at a time. That was really good. What else kind of stood out to you, Lisa?
Just not being one of the frogs that doesn't take action.
Or being the frog that jumps and then misses and lands in the alligator's mouth.
Yeah.
I don't know where that came from. Sorry.
Well, it's always intriguing each time we hear about some of the poorest communities, and they're so welcoming and giving to complete strangers.
Yeah, we hear that time and time again, and probably I assume that most of our listeners have as well. But as you're out adventuring and overlanding and going to different places, we'd love to hear your stories on what you've come across and the kind of folks that you've met and the experiences that you have. I think those are great stories to pass on.
I'd almost say once we get out there ourselves, my motto, I'd like it to be happier with less.
Yeah, I agree. 100%.
So I'm also going to call it OPP.
Who?
OPP.
Is that the state troopers?
No. It's organized, prepare, and patient.
Organize, prepare, and man, you are smart.
So when you get ready,
you be all three of those? The organized, the patience, and the, what was the other one? Prepared?
Prepared. Oh, I think I do that every day.
You do. Hey, I'll cover prepared. I'm good at that one. Organization and patience, all you. I guess partnership is good. Eric and Brittany, thanks guys so much for taking your time. It was great talking to you. Lisa was very sad that she was not there.
So if you do have a meet and greet and you're close.
Yeah, make that meet and greet in Washington State.
Yeah, why not?
I don't think that's not going to happen. But thank you so much for taking your time. It was really cool to learn your story, to learn what you're doing, and that connection with the RV world and the overlanding world never even dawned on me. And I'm guessing that many of you, our listeners, maybe that connection really didn't hit you either. So there's a lot to learn from the folks in the RV world. So check that out. There was the podcast, The RV Entrepreneur. Then be sure and remember, if you plan on going to the Overland Expo West in Flagstaff, Arizona, it's coming up real quick. That's May 17th through the 19th. Be sure to join Eric and Brittany. Their session titled Overlanding While Working Full Time. Is it possible? Man, I wish we could be there to go to that. I bet that's going to be a really good one. They'll also be featured on two other panels. One is regional questions and answers for Mexico and Central America. And the other, Overlanding with Kids Roundtable. So if you're a family that is out adventuring, that should be great.
It's a good idea to visit the show notes page on our website at ghtOverland.com/podcasts Select the Jeepsies episode. All the details and helpful links are already there for you.
That is correct. And send your questions, suggestions, and feedback to ghtoverlandpodcast@gmail.com. You can also slide into the DMs and give us a direct message on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Those are the three we hang out. And if you have an Amazon Echo, remember to tell Alexa, play the GHT Overland podcast. We'd love it if you would connect with us on the social medias. You can find us at GHT Overland. Be sure to share this episode with all of your friends who enjoy travel off the beaten path. Overland travel is all about meeting new friends, seeing the most amazing places on earth, and of course, new food and strong drinks.
Lots of strong drinks. So if you have a favorite drink or food recipe for overlanding, we'd love to feature it and you. Send them to ghtoverlandpodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the episode, it would mean the world to us if you did two things to help out. Rate and review the podcast, that's one. And subscribe. Giving the GHT Overland podcast a little extra love on your podcast platform of choice. Thank you, and we will see you next Thursday for a brand new episode of the GHT Overland podcast.
Do you know where we're headed?
No.
Where we're virtually headed, not physically, unfortunately. If we were to go there physically, here's a hint. It would be, I believe, the longest flight you could possibly take from where we're at. It could be a little off, but it's pretty close. Oh, you were smart.
I'm good at this. Bye.